The Healing Spring Show, healing families and communities by breaking the stigma of addiction and expanding the scope of recovery. Now here's your host, John Edmondson.
Hi, welcome back to Healing Spring Show. Are you ready to go on a journey of recovery? How about the hero's journey to recovery? Today we have a author, musician, and counselor who's going to guide us on that path. Jim Savage. Jim?
Hi, how you doing?
Hey,
Thank
welcome
you
to
so
the
much.
show. Glad to have you here. So you do a lot of different things on this journey and counseling. Can you tell us a little bit about, how did you get started on this path? What you do with other people when you help them?
The best way to describe what I do these days is my story is integrally related to my own personal recovery. I started working in the addiction field in 1983 when I first got sober. And I say first got sober. In 1988, I relapsed as a drug counselor and ended up in treatment again. And as a result of going through that experience, because the first 5 years of being sober, I worked a very questionable recovery program. I became a counselor and did that instead of working recovery. I thought I knew everything. And so my recovery really started in '88 when I went to treatment. And when I came back, when you're a relapsed drug counselor, you can't work in this field. And I had to figure out something else to do. And I'm a musician, and I thought, well, that's the only other thing that I could really do well enough to make money at. But going back into the clubs and playing music didn't seem like a good idea because I was going to take recovery seriously this time. So I got this idea I thought, I'm going to try to use music somehow related to recovery stuff. And I got this idea of, as I was learning this new perspective from my own personal recovery or my personal experience with recovery, and I was seeing, oh, gee, as addicts, we all have basically the same story. That, the names might be different, the places might be a little bit different, but ultimately we all sort of hit bottom and start over again. And I got this idea of telling that story through music. And I thought if I put a string of songs together that tell that story. And then I thought, well, and if my premise is true that we all have basically the same story, and I'm an addict and I've been writing songs all my life, I should be able to go back and find songs from different times of my life that tell this story and put them together. And so that's what I did, and I found a bunch of songs. I ended up writing a couple of new songs specifically to fill a couple gaps, but for the most part, I put this piece together that had songs that I wrote when I was a teenager and it became this musical production I called The Journey. And I started going around to treatment centers, and I would play these songs, and I'd talk a little bit about each one and explain where it fits in my process and how this relates to the recovery process. And then in the meantime, I was also, because I got interested in personal growth things, and I started studying different spiritual traditions, and I was studying psychological self-help stuff, and I got really interested in the Joseph Campbell work and the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is found through fairy tales and mythology, and it's this common motif. It's basically, when you translate it psychologically, it becomes a roadmap for personal development.
So when you're doing all this, I just want to jump in because there's so much great information, and I want to get to all of it. I want to get to what we have on the table here, these cool instruments. So you were a counselor, you got into recovery, and then something happened between A and Z, and you I guess they called it, you went back out.
Right.
What was the learning or growth period between starting that and coming back in? Was there anything that...
The main thing for me coming back in was having to let go of all of my self-knowledge. I'd been trained as a counselor, and I was not practicing it personally. And that was, I had to drop all the ego stuff, come back in like a newcomer, and let go of all the, I thought I knew it all, and just have to become teachable. And that was the main thing, and really recognize the difference. There's as an impaired professional, there's a line that you walk between, you don't use your career, your work, as part of your own recovery program. That's a message, that's a whole other topic that I have experience on. That is not my personal recovery program, helping other people professionally. So that was the main thing.
Yeah, and I want to highlight that for a moment, because I know a lot of counselors out there that, they go into drug treatment because they believe in it, they're sober now, and then they go back out and they feel like that's it. It's kind of over, or no road back, or the shame they feel.
Well, and a lot of people, it's really common to get sober and say, now I want to help other people. And there's a fine line that I did not understand at that time, and now I'm real clear about that, about keeping my own personal way of helping other people. That's not the same thing as my counseling other people.
But then you took it a step further, Jim. Now you went into counseling, but then also developing all these things, the hero's journey.
Right.
Can you tell us just about that piece of it?
And so I got into, again, I was using the music, and then the Joseph Campbell stuff, and the hero's journey, in particular storytelling. And I'm a performer. I love mixing entertainment with recovery activities. And there's a whole, back in the early 90s, and Robert Bly wrote a book called Iron John, and in the storytelling, the men's movement, and playing the drums and telling the stories, and I got into all that, and so I learned how to tell stories perform stories while I was playing the drum, and I developed curriculum using the hero's journey to relate this to, again, the hero's journey is this cyclical process of a hero, something happens and a hero has to leave the kingdom to go on a journey, that he's going to face ordeals and challenges, usually life and death, and if he overcomes them, he's going to return back to the kingdom and something good's going to happen. And so, like I said, when psychologists started looking at this, and they see that the art of, or the magic of storytelling is, when somebody makes up a story, it's their way of explaining their experience of the world around them. And that's why when we look at stories from all around the world, different cultures, different times, this really common pattern emerges that they've identified as the hero's journey. We leave this nice place, go on struggles, and we come back to this nice place and something good happens. And it's really the transformation from childhood to adulthood in psychological development perspectives. And then again, that relates to the addiction recovery process. And so as I was putting this musical production, The Journey, together, because it follows that process, it became a musical portrayal of the hero's journey. And so it starts off in the happy innocence of childhood, or even, the pureness of the original wholeness of when we come into life, and that the human experience is we lose that original wholeness, or the loss of innocence. In the fairy tales, I have one fairy tale that I work with in particular, of that, in a nutshell, the princesses are told not to eat the apples. They'll disappear under the ground if they eat the apples. And they do, and they go under the ground, and then the hero has to slay dragons to rescue the princesses from out of the darkness, and then the hero comes back and ends up becoming king. And that's a really short way of telling the story. But I've been working with that story for 30 years in drug treatment, and it fits perfectly.
That's what I was wondering.
For
how does
all
that relate to drug
all
treatment?
the different issues.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. The very first time, because let me back up and say this, storytelling is like the ultimate motivational enhancement tool. Now, motivational enhancement, there's a buzzword in our treatment industry. It's good when for the client for it to be their own idea. Allow the client to make it their own idea, and they're going to be more motivated to follow whatever the suggestion is. Storytelling is this action of, when you tell a story, you're putting out a collection of symbols, and the listener attaches their own meaning to those symbols. And so what they're doing is it's pulling out information from their subconscious that they're seeing in front of them. And so like for example, the hero has to go to the bottom of the well and slay the dragons. And the fun thing about storytelling is when I'll put a story out and then we'll ask the listeners to, what's your interpretation of it? And we have a funny little joke that it turns out to be a joke when they realize what I'm doing. The first person will say for example, in that story, the hero paces at the bottom of the well for 3 years after he slays the dragons. What do you think that means? And first person will say, I think that the pacing at the bottom of the well means recovery is a long, slow process, and you just have to be patient. And I'll say, that's exactly right. And they'll go, oh, good.
They're excited about it.
And then the next person will say, what do you say, I think the pacing at the bottom of the well is the getting nowhere when you're in your addiction and wasting time and not being productive. And I'll say, that's exactly right. And then they're going, okay, what?
Yeah.
And then the next person says something different, and I'll say, that's exactly right. And then they start catching on that I'm going to say, every person's interpretation is exactly right, because all it's doing is it's bringing something out of you that you already know. I'll say, and then I'll wrap it up by saying, I could come in here and I could give a lecture saying, recovery is a long, slow process, and you need to learn to be patient and that kind of stuff. And I'll say to the clients usually, and that'll probably just go, you'll go to lunch and you'll forget about what you learned in the lecture. But 30 years from now, you might still remember the image of the hero pacing at the bottom of the well and be able, because you draw inspiration from the symbols. That's the sort of the archetypal images that they add a little extra energy to inspire action. And so, for example, the very first time I did a story at Healing Springs with the clients at your place, I remember a guy leaving group, and he said, I'm going to be the hero. That inspired me. I'm going to be the hero, and I'm going to slay my dragons. And and he was inspired and motivated just by hearing that story and having that little discussion.
Yeah, and you're helping people tell their own story.
Exactly.
But then giving them some kind of symbology to really process it, maybe externalize it a little bit at first so it's not so heavy on their heart when they share it.
Exactly.
It's a powerful way to do that, and this is something you've done before. You had mentioned to me about not psychodrama, but another form of theatrical enactment.
Right, and so taking it a step further, as I said, when I was working with my musical production, The Journey, I ended up turning that into a full stage production. And so it first was just songs, but then we started developing, okay, what would this look like with a dramatic, storyline attached to it? And I had my own IOP program for a lot of years, and we would put on stage productions with the clients. They'd study the songs as part of the curriculum in their group, but then we'd have a theater program where they'd spend weeks, a couple months literally, working on this stage production. And it told the story of one person's, how this hero's journey plays out in one person's life. And so the kids would take roles as actors. I did a sort of School of Rock thing with the musicians in my group, and I'd lead a band, and the band would be on the side of the stage that would play the songs, and there'd be, acting, miming during the songs, but then in between the songs there'd be dialogue scenes, and it told a story that started in childhood, and it showed the happy, innocent childhood with the intact family and the picture-perfect idealistic thing. And then it goes to showing, well, not everybody's childhood is like that, and it shows the broken home, and it's starting to indicate the setup for the lead character. Fast forward, then she's a little bit older, and she's in her teen years, and she's starting to get off the path, and and in some of that psychological processing, she's going through that process of trying to find herself, and it's making misguided attempts at finding herself, and she gets into drug and alcohol use, and that pulls her off, and she hits bottom, and it goes through a dark period, but then it resolves into she goes through the death and rebirth experience, and there's a treatment scene, and it literally shows her going through a treatment thing, and then ultimately, at the end of the play, she's 2 years sober, getting a 2-year chip at a meeting, and it ends in a very positive resolution. And so, because, and it is, like I said, I created curriculum around all that to show how this is a musical portrayal of the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm. And you're giving them a vision for the future.
Exactly.
So, like, at the end of the play, end of the story, you're giving them the vision of picking up the chip and being sober.
Right.
And what was the experience that the clients would say after going through that? What was it like for them?
Oh, it is probably one of the most powerful things I'd ever done in treatment. I did this for 10 years. I haven't done a production of the play for a few years since I sold my IOP program. But one, again, it's so powerful for individuals to express their experience through the arts. Mm-hmm. And so it's an affirmation to them. We would always couch it as we're getting ready for our production. It was almost a hero's journey going through the production, because there would go through this process of, I'd have to get tough on them sometimes. We'd have these late night, 6 to 12 Friday night rehearsals where, and it was a great sober activity for kids, but then I'd have to get tough, and reel them in, and we got to get focused. And we framed it from the perspective of, this is, in 12-step recovery, they talk about service work. You stay sober by passing on the message. And the whole theme of when we would do those productions was, you're carrying the message. This is a major way of carrying a message, and there's going to be somebody in that audience, you have no idea, who, by you working hard in this practice here tonight, and me getting tough on you, saying, now come on, you need to focus, you need to do this a little better, reel you in, the discipline and commitment that you assume going through the production is all for the purpose of carrying the message, and this is service work for you, and that brings out the best in people, and they feel so inspired, especially when because it works. Those performances, we'd have, the community would come to them, and the place would be packed, and it was moving and inspiring, and the audience would be crying, and they'd be laughing, and again, all these young people that were performing this, they're just blossoming, with how that would make them feel. Not to mention just all the issues that they're dealing with in their personal lives, the self-esteem issues, and it is a way to, make them feel good about themselves and pride.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going there. So one is it's a real-time practice of discipline, of focus. So you're giving them that opportunity through something that's kind of stimulating.
Right.
Then you're giving them that sense of purpose.
Right.
And we talk about, if you have that why, you can go through any what in this world. So now they have purpose and meaning behind it.
Exactly.
And then they're actually helping other people quite literally, making that difference, and they're seeing it. And by the end of the production, I'm guessing this is not a 1 week thing, or maybe it is. It's over time that they actually begin to change and grow as people. Right.
Well, and again, they're changing and growing. And at any given time, you would have some clients that were brand new in treatment, and you'd have some clients that were in aftercare that had been, sober for a year that were doing. They were all working together. You could see how it would pull the newcomer in. And again, this is just from treatment perspective, having innovative, fun things to participate. That's huge in being able to, especially working with young people. You got to give them something fun to do and something different than just sitting in group, and relying on that to be reinforcing their recovery. So it satisfied that. But the other thing that I felt so strongly about, and going back to the Joseph Campbell stuff, he would talk about the importance of how the arts and entertainment shape what he called the mythology of the culture, that there is a subconscious agreement that we all have about how we feel about things and how we behave, and we call that the mythology. And the arts and entertainment are one of the strongest influencers of the mythology of the culture. We do what we see. We're influenced by what we see. And so lots of times there can be negative, depressing, life sucks and then you die kind of messages or graffiti that you see when you're driving down the freeway. Right. But what I felt so strongly about is that this journey and doing this full stage production would create a positive mythology. You have people literally acting out their own experience. Every person in that production has slayed their dragons. They've been to the bottom of the well. They've faced their demons. They've gone through the transformation. They're on the other side. And another metaphor that the journey employs is it has these references to the sun's journey across the sky. That's a Native American. The medicine wheel is another circular process of the sun coming out of the east is the beginning, but the sun, and it reaches the highest point, but then it descends into the darkness, which is the same thing as the hero going down into the darkness, where we all have to move into the darkness of ourselves, look within to face our personal issues, and it's in doing that we are able to go through the ordeal of facing myself and coming out the other side, returning to the sunrise. And so there's some narration in the journey that keeps referring to the sun's journey across the sky also. And so again, each one of these kids on the stage has been through that whole process, and that when they're presenting it to the community, it inspires and creates that mythology. And I was telling you yesterday, one of the things that when I had my IOP program, we had our big group room there was a stage down at one end of the room, and it had theater lights, and there was musical equipment on there, and there was a sound booth in the back. And then it had the traditional treatment stuff in there. There was the 12-step posters on the wall, and there was a big mural that said, "Expect a miracle." And then it had some of this Native American sort of feel art on the wall. And it created a setting that from what I understood, a cultural mythology perspective, whenever we would tour people through our facility, this happened every time. When they would walk in the room, I could count on it happening. They'd walk in that big room, and they'd look around and they'd go, "Oh, I love how this feels in here." And I knew at that time that that's what that mythology stuff is. It's subconscious or unconscious. They experienced it. They knew what went on in that room without me telling them. They look at that stage and there's got to be something recovery related that goes on in here. It's artistic and it's expressive, and we know this is a treatment program. And at that microsecond, they knew there are heroes in here that are facing their demons, coming out the other side and experiencing the transformation. I knew when I'd say, "Well, here's our group room," and they'd come in and they'd just be, "Wow." And that's one of the things that I've always felt almost the most gratified by doing this kind of work, is creating these experiences that inspire at the deepest level.
And for you, it sounds almost all about the experience. Very different from other places of treatment or forms of treatment, which aren't wrong, like learning, reading the books, going through the ideas, information. But for you, it's actually walking them through something. And not just, a lot of times people want to fight the arts, like the movies and everything out there, say they're given a bad influence. This song is a bad influence. But what you're saying is, instead of kind of beating them, joining them a little bit and saying, let's not fight music, let's not fight movies or art, let's use them in a way.
Use it as a positive, harness. There's so much power and so much potential in using the artistic expression, just when you make that your intention.
Yeah, and so I noticed, speaking of music, we have these different objects over here.
Okay.
Can you tell me, how would you use these in a group setting?
Okay. Well, the best example that I could give you, the opening scene of this play production. I'm going to get you involved here in a second, John.
Okay.
We're going to do something outside the box here. The opening scene, as I said, it depicts the sun's journey across the sky. And so, and you out there, I want you to picture this. The opening of a play. The room is dark. It's getting quiet. And then all of a sudden, you hear this sound. And I want you to do this for a second, okay?
Okay.
And you just go nice and slow. It'll go for a really long time, but then when it runs out, you can just
turn the other way.
switch over like that,
All right.
okay?
So what do we got here, by the way?
It's called a rain stick.
We got a rain stick going here.
And I make a lot of use of rain sticks. People like that sound. It's
Okay.
very soothing. It's
kind of a calm
we use it for
feeling.
meditation.
All right.
But this is the opening scene of the journey, which, if you picture that it's dark, and then you hear this sound, and I'm going to play the flute for just a second, and then there's going to be some narration. And so you go ahead and play that rain
All right,
stick,
so I'm
okay?
going to rain stick a little bit here.
There you go.
All right.
Just keep going. And then this starts. A drum beat starts,
All right,
and
yeah.
some narration. I'm going to try to do this together. I'm going to say the narration that the audience would hear when this starts. You can stop doing that.
Do that,
We're just,
all right.
then all of a sudden we've got this. And while this is happening, the sunrise is appearing out of the darkness. A red spot with a silhouette in front of the sun, and the audience hears this narration. I'll try to remember this here. It says, "As I stand in the east and the first rays of sunlight dance upon the horizon, I feel welcome. I feel connected. I feel like I belong. But I know that I'll be leaving this place as my journey is about to begin. Just as the sun rises out of the east and makes its way across the sky, I know that I too have a path. I don't know what that path holds for me. There may be painful places along the way. There may be dangerous places. But just as the sun must give itself away to the darkness, that it might rise again, I know that I too will one day return to this place which feels like home, this place which is the beginning of life, this place where the voices greet me, singing, 'Welcome, for you deserve to be here.'" And then the lights go down.
And then everything begins. That's powerful, Jim.
So,
And if you're watching it, maybe you hear this and you experience it a little bit. But being in the room, what you were talking about a minute ago is palpable. That experience of there's something in the room, there's some energy here that is making the difference. And I have a rain stick in my hand, which is kind of fun too.
did you want me to take that?
Yeah,
and put
here
that
you go.
back?
But that's it. You get a good feeling just holding that, though. I can
Yeah.
really see how using these tools, these songs, these instruments makes a real difference in people. So maybe if they're in pain and they're in suffering, it's not just, it is call people for help, get support, do these other things in addition to their treatment, but then use this music, use the sound, use the stories as like a healing distraction, but at the same time something that's powerful that's bringing that out in them. Yeah.
Well, and that's it's two sides. There's the experiential side. I get into talking about right brain and left brain, and
yeah.
I talk about whole brain approach to treatment. because the experiential is the right brain, which allows for that holistic, apply your own meaning, think outside the box. But then the value of being able to switch over into the left brain, which is the didactic, reasoning, rational, and that's the being able to talk. We just experienced that, and I could stop right there and say, well, we just experienced that, and that was powerful, and the sounds were meaningful, and it did something to me on a visceral level. But then we can have, I do that opening little narration with treatment groups all the time. I get people, come on up here, play the rain stick, here you guys do the drum beat, you read the narration, and we end up having an hour-long discussion just on those lyrics from that narration, because that ends up being such a powerful going to the heart of really what we're doing in treatment. It describes the original wholeness, that place of innocence, of pureness that we come into life from.
Right.
It's in the beginning, we were created in the image of the Creator. It's once upon a time, there was a king. That's our connection to our higher power. It's the sun in the medicine wheel, the first ray of sun coming. We come from this magical place, but our life journey is going to involve some loss of connection. And how that plays out is different for everybody in everybody's life.
Every story is different.
But in treatment, then we get into talking about what types of traumatic experiences did you go through that resulted in your loss of connection, that loss of, when we say innocence, it's not about when I started doing bad things. It's about that loss of just that purity and magical experience of life. And it's more and more today we're becoming aware and landing on the solution or drawing the connection to addiction and the desire for connection. And so what this opening narration of that play, it says, I'm leaving this place. I got a hunch I'm going to go through the ringer, and I got a hunch I'm going to try get back to this place. And when I'm working with people with substance use disorders, it resonates with them when I suggest that I strongly believe that what was going on with your addictive behavior is this attempt to feel that original connection, to feel that wholeness. And lots of times clients in treatment groups, when I say, what line stood out to you from that narration, the most common one that they say is the very last line, welcome, for you deserve to be here. And they say,
yeah,
I want to feel that way. I want to, it's something that they remember that on a deep level when they did feel connected and that they belong, and they want that back again.
Yeah, and it's the same thing in mindfulness, is the idea is we're going for the greatest self within, and we go on a journey to seek it. And within that,
Right.
There's going to be pain, there's going to be suffering, but at the end of the cycle, then we find that inner peace that we're looking for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then that gives an example of how there's many, many paths that all, lead to
the same point.
top of the same mountain.
Yeah. So, Jim, we're starting to come to a close on the show today. I'm really glad that we got to play the instruments and learn about this hero's journey and how people walk through recovery. What are your recommendations for people that are out there, that are listening, that are watching? What would you recommend for them?
I would, it starts with that awareness. Sometimes we get bogged down in labels of, are you an addict or not? And as opposed to saying, on a deeper level, do you want to get your life together? Do you want to experience that wholeness? Recently I was asked to do some work with some people under the heading of chronic relapsers. There's some clients in treatment who'd been back a couple times, and they asked me to do some special work with them from chronic relapsing. And I'll tell you what, I walked in and I said, okay, they want me to do some focused work with you on chronic relapse. What do you think? How do we build a bigger, better relapse prevention plan? And I knew, looking in their eyes, they're like, I've done so much relapse prevention plan. And I started talking about this stuff, the fulfillment. Do you feel like something's missing? Is there? What happens when I mention the word fulfillment? And I watch their eyes light up, and they said, "That's what's missing. I want fulfillment. I want to feel whole." Those type of things. And I started realizing that relapse prevention, this stuff that we're talking about here today, that inspiration that people feel, just, and again, without the didactic explanation of it, just from doing our experiential piece, I like that. And I suggest that's more powerful, having an inspiration, that good feeling that's supposed to come from within. Because a lot of people, when they get sober, they don't experience happiness. Okay, I have to give up all these things, not to mention I gave up my best friend, my chemical, and then I had to give up my literal friends and stop hanging out with certain people and things like that. And where's the joy? And it's understandable that they're frustrated in recovery. And I try to focus or encourage people to start looking for use the words fulfillment and wholeness, and open your eyes towards ways that you can seek to satisfy that.
Yeah, seek the fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on that. All right, well, I think that's going to be our ending message today, is seek the fulfillment within, the way that works best for you. And Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
A wonderful experience.
This was fun.